Hey everyone, I'm Matt Burns, and this is the very last TechCrunch Live, where we help founders build better venture-backed businesses. I'm glad you're here, and I don't know if you know this, but businesses create a whole lot of data now. Once upon a time, businesses used logs to record and analyze data, and then came metrics. And now the modern tech stack produces so much data that businesses aren't left with many options for the old tools. Look at Uber. Around 2015, 2016, they were producing gobs of data, and there was no tools that could properly store or analyze them. So what do? They built the tool themselves, and it allowed them to analyze and utilize all of that data. It was a pivotal moment for Uber. And Martin Mao founded that. He's the one that built that tool, and he's here to talk about his current company, Chronosphere. And we have Jerry Chen, a partner at Greylock. He invested 4 times in Chronosphere. So I'm thrilled to have them here to talk about observability and what a modern tech company can use for it too. So we're going to talk about a few things today, including how companies can use Chronosphere to rein in their data, how to do so while watching their costs. And lastly, I want to talk about where Chronosphere is today with their company culture. The company just won an award yesterday, 4 awards about their culture. And the company started during the pandemic and was remote first from the very beginning. So it's a very timely topic as companies are struggling to get workers back into the office. So with that, thank you for being here, Jerry and Martin.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for having us for the last ever TechCrunch Live. Martin and I feel honored.
I saved it just for you guys.
Best for last.
Yeah. Jerry, let's start with you, though. Tell me where Chronosphere is today and where did it come from?
Chronosphere, like you said, it's the right side of history. To your point, Matthew, that you're only producing more data, higher cardinality of data, and every company's now a software company, right? So like all the trends are, in Chronosphere's way. And Chronosphere is what we call the leader in cloud native observability. So if you want to run your application, run your business, you want to make intelligent decisions on all the data that's powering your infrastructure, you need Chronosphere. So it's the leader in cloud native observability, and we're super excited to be part of the journey.
Yeah. Now, Martin, when you founded this company, what was the overarching thought? What were you trying to do?
Yeah, I think the overarching thought was, we had solved this problem at Uber. And when we originally solved this problem, we thought it was a problem just reserved for Uber, the Googles, the Netflixes of the world. And what we realized was cloud native was becoming popular across the whole industry. In 2017, all 3 major cloud providers sort of declared Kubernetes the winner. Mm-hmm. It was very clear that was going to be the one common platform across all the major cloud providers, even companies like VMware. And it was very clear that any major enterprise was going to go either multi-cloud or hybrid, and hence had to adopt this type of architecture. So it was almost like the industry realized that was the direction it was going to go, and hence everybody was going to run into the same types of problems that we ran into at Uber, and hence we decided to build something around the technology that we had created.
I was hoping you could bring us up to speed. Can you tell me about your current level of founding, where you're at, the amount of employees you have?
Yeah, 100%. So we were founded in 2019 in May. So we just celebrated turning 4. So I think officially we're a preschooler now, but still pretty young. About 300 employees also to date. We've raised 4 rounds, and Jerry has participated in every round, luckily for us. And I think we've raised over $330 million or so in total. Yeah.
You guys closed a Series C in October, and then a C1 or a D or whatever you're calling it in January, right? It was total about $300 million. I was hoping you could tell me what the pitch was then, and what was it originally? How has the company changed over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we did close those 2 rounds pretty close to each other and raised about 300 million across there. Honestly, part of the reason behind that was, we raised our original C at the peak, perhaps, of the market, where in 2021 there were really high valuations. And honestly, talking with prospective employees, there was a little bit of doubt on, hey, is that valuation real? So we thought, hey, let's go raise again at perhaps the bottom end of the market to prove to folks that yes, this evaluation is extremely real, and we're still a unicorn there. I'll say the pitch on the product, and Jerry, I'd love your take on this. I don't think the pitch on the product or where the company's focus has really changed over time. However, I would say the companies we're talking to, their priorities have changed over time. So the original pitch was always, as you move to a cloud, a native environment, adopt microservices on containers, you need a better tool, a more effective tool on one hand. And on the other hand, you need it to be more cost efficient as well. Like the cost of these things didn't make sense anymore from the APM world. So our pitch was always a more effective tool at a price and a value that made sense to companies. And I'd say historically, you can imagine in the growth years, folks really weren't interested in the cost story as much. If you could give them a more effective tool, great. And if it happened to be cheaper, that's sort of icing on the cake, but it wasn't the main thing, even though that value prop has always been there. In the last 6 to 9 months, that's almost inverted 180, right? Now everyone's looking for a much more cost-efficient tool. And hey, if you happen to be more effective as well, that's almost the icing on top. So from my perspective, we've always had these two value props, and that's what we put all of our energy into. I think how customers perceive those are fairly different now. But again, I'd love, Jerry, your take from the outside of if you think our positioning has changed there.
Yeah, I think you said earlier, Matt, what was about Chronosphere early and why was it so exciting? It's like, it's a great market. It's a big market. And there's a lot of incumbents there like Datadog or open source projects like Prometheus. And so one of the things we're doing is you'd be a 10x better, a 10x cheaper solution. And in Chronosphere, in many ways, was both. It was 10x cheaper in terms of cost and scale on metrics observability compared to other players out there at DIY, and then is also just 10x better in terms of what you can do as both a developer and kind of a VP observability. And so I would say both value propositions were there from the beginning 4 years ago. And I think, in bull markets where everyone's growing gangbusters, 10x better and doing things differently was the selling point. In a market like today where people are worried about cost and spending, 10x cheaper than Datadog or Prometheus or anything out there plays very well to the CFO audience, if you will. So it's why Chronosphere has done well both in the 2019, 2020 timeframe and then 2022, 2023 timeframe as well. And we're super bullish about the future because the roadmap ahead of the company is incredible.
Yeah. Now, Martin, it's hard for companies to change their pricing strategy once they've already established it. Did you guys start this low cost option from the very beginning? And if so, what was the priority in doing so?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. It's very hard to change a pricing strategy once you start, especially as you become larger. You can imagine you have existing customers, you have perhaps the street that's looking at your NRR numbers and whatnot. So for us, we were both lucky at the beginning that we were able to start with a more cost-efficient solution from day one. And that was just because Uber ran a very low margin business. So we just had to make very efficient technology for them. But there was actually a decision early on. And what we realized was just being cheaper in terms of unit economics didn't really scale a lot because there was incremental gains on the efficiency that we could get there. What we realized pretty quickly early on is a better strategy was to have our customers understand the value of the data and see if they can optimize the value of that data and make the trade-offs there, right? So it's not just about making it cheaper. It's like, well, you're storing all of this data. How much of it is actually useful to you? If we can show you that, and in what format is it useful? You can imagine in what we do, you don't often look at all the raw data. What you want to look for is the outlier, like the P99, or like the aggregation, like the summary. So if we could give you those answers that you're looking for, but didn't have to store the raw data, that was a much more efficient way of going about it. So that was a philosophy we had from the company's perspective from the beginning. And honestly, it was the only philosophy that we could see that would work out in the long run because the explosion of data was growing exponentially. So even though we were cheaper, unit economically, we could tell that in 3 years from now, where everybody had 20x the amount of data, these unit economics would be broken anyway. So it was just a strategy for us from the beginning. But having that strategy from the beginning means that we've always had it with us. So we didn't have to change pricing strategies as we've grown. And I think that's been an advantage because those things are always really hard to pull off. And also, I think, again, as you get larger, even if you were to make your backend more efficient, I imagine there are constraints on how much you could lower your price just because there are pressures from the market.
Yeah, market and your investors like Jerry, right? Because when you sign in to invest in a company, you're expecting certain returns.
I mean, 100%. I'd say we're probably lucky there. One of the things we've been able to do, not for our prospective customers, but for our existing customers this year is because the tool set is there, it allows them to spend less incrementally as their business grows. And you can imagine a lot of our customers are leveraging this tool set right now, thus that the data in their business still grows at a particular rate. But you can imagine their spend grows at a sub-linear rate there. And I actually say we're pretty lucky to have investors like Jerry who understand the long-term value of that. Like, yes, right now in the short term, as companies are trying to get more efficient, we are probably helping them do that and maybe leaving some dollars on the table. But in the long run, it makes us a better partner to these companies, and it's ultimately going to pay off. So I must admit, yes, investors are looking for returns there for sure. But I would say we're quite lucky in the sense that our investors are are strategic enough to see the long-term benefit of our strategy, and sort of willing to make the short-term trade-off there.
I want to stay with this pricing topic for one more question. But Jerry, to you, what advice do you have for founders that are in this market where they're suddenly priced out of it and they need to lower their prices?
You mean of the products? It's
the products.
Look, yeah, I think the focus is on the customer, right? I mean, first things first, Martin, Rob, and the entire team is focused on the customer. They started with metrics. They added tracing for APM. They're looking at all the things from end-to-end logs, traces, metrics, et cetera. So there's a ton of data. And as long as you're creating value for your customers, and you're going to be in a good position. So pricing really is how you capture or you quantify the value created. So a company startup creates X dollars of value, and pricing is basically how you split that value between yourself as a company and your customer. And I think the early days, you just want to create as much value as possible, grow the whole pie. And pricing is a reflection of, how much value you keep yourself as a company and how much value you give to the customer. And that changes over time. And ideally, like Martin alluded to, that as you use Chronosphere and use the product more, the value should go, more than linear, exponential. So you're actually increasing more value to the customer as you use more and more Chronosphere. So you use more and more Chronosphere's products, you get, more exponential value than linear value. So maybe your pricing stays linear, right? It increases, as your usage goes up, but the value you create for the customer is exponential, in which case Chronosphere captures their value, but it's exponential value created for the customer. And so I think pricing is not a dirty word, Matt, right? It's basically a reflection of the value you're creating and is a reflection of what value you keep as a company and what value you create for the customer. And as long as you're creating exponential value for the customer, it's okay for you as a vendor to capture linear value and usage goes up.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. I got to ask, how did you guys meet? How did you guys connect?
Well, I mean, I can tell my story. The meet cute story is always funny. Martin, why don't you start and then we can compare notes?
Yeah, happy to do that. I would say I don't know how these VC companies do it, but they have a very good sense of what are interesting technologies, I think, inside larger companies, because I think these larger companies like Uber have been solving problems that very few other companies have to solve. And they generally get a glimpse of solving problems ahead of the rest of the market. So, I would say, VCs like Greylock have an ability, I don't know how, it's a secret of knowing what are interesting technologies there are there. And then I think, from that perspective, Jerry reached out to us, and we started to chat to him about, potentially thinking about spinning up a company in this space. I would say what was unique for us with Jerry in particular was that, it's quite, especially back in 2019, might be harder now, but it's quite easy to find somebody with capital. It's much harder to find an investor that actually can get deep in the technology, get deep in the market, and really understand what you're trying to do. Because I think we were looking for strategic partners as opposed to cheap capital. So, we met with Jerry, I think, over on many occasions. In fact, once I was giving a talk at a conference in Portland, and Jerry just randomly showed up and sat front row center. So halfway through my talk, I looked down, and there was Jerry Chen listening to my talk there. So, I think just getting to know your investors over time is definitely important, and making sure you're picking the right strategic partner, because
And you were at Uber during this whole time, right?
Yeah, I was at Uber during this time.
You're currently employed at a company that was known to pay people wild money.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So, Jerry, what's your story?
It wasn't random, Martin. It wasn't random that I showed up at the conference. It's a lot of investors like myself like to back founders or engineers at companies like Uber or Facebook or Google, because we like to say they've seen the future, right? It's like they're dealing with problems of scale and cost math that the rest of the world will see. So the move to cloud native, the move to metrics at scale, they've seen that problem, they've solved it, and they're where the rest of the world is going. So first and foremost, we love this idea. They've seen the problem, they've seen the future. Second, they built this thing M3 at Uber. They open sourced it. Open source also is a powerful signal saying, okay, not only is this stuff good and being used in anger by Uber, but it's also open source and used by other people. And I'm a frequent troll of open source projects and engineering blogs. And I also, coming my background as a long-term operator and product guy at VMware, understood the value of observability metrics. And Martin's co-founder, Rob Skillington, wrote this nice blog in the Uber engineering blog around M3. And I checked out the GitHub repo and started reading up on it. Loved what we're doing. And I felt like this observability at scale at lower cost made sense. And I reached out through some mutual friends at Uber. And then, Rob was in New York, Martin was in Seattle. And I think over the course of a few months, we spent a lot of time, talking on the phone, a couple of dinners, just about, technology in general. And then if and when they were ready to start a company, I want to, I would say earn the right to work with them. And so I think after a few conversations over a few months, I feel lucky to earn the right to work with Martin and Rob. And that's how the first investment happened. We're lucky to be the first VC behind two great founders.
Now, Martin, what do you remember about starting the company at that time? What was hard?
I think a lot of things were difficult at the beginning. To your point, we both had great jobs at a pretty high-paying company there, right? So the risk of, both had young families at the time as well, so the risk of just packing up shop one day and doing something on our own was definitely there. I think that the thing that and you can imagine we're both engineers by trade, right? So like building a product is one thing. How do we go sell a product to somebody out there? How do we go market a product? Didn't have any of those answers there for sure. So a lot of challenges, and probably typical challenges at the beginning. I would say the thing that made us commit to doing this was taking a step back and really looking at the opportunity cost, and also just saying, if we don't go through with this, will we regret that decision later on? And that answer was a resounding yes. So I think that made the decision easier, although it was a little bit scary, you can imagine, at the beginning. And we've had a pretty fortunate run thus far, so it's worked out well for us. Yeah,
I like the story a lot because there are just a countless amount of people that are stuck in a job somewhere. It could be a very good job and they want to go out on their own, but there's this mental anguish that comes along with it. How did you deal with that mental stepping stones to get over it?
Yeah, when you look at the opportunity cost, and I think we're all very lucky to be working in tech, when you really look at the opportunity cost of, I think maybe, you give an idea, 2 years worth of energy. I think after 2 years, you have a good sense of whether it's working out or not, right? So it's like, it's a 2-year investment you're going to make. And when you look at the opportunity cost there, okay, it's 2 years, you're not working at a large tech company, potentially getting a nice paycheck, but 2 years on, if it doesn't work out, could you go back and get your old job or perhaps a better job? Generally in tech, that answer is yes. So then really, what is your opportunity cost? I think it comes down to how convicted you are on that idea, how big is the market, whether you can get funding and whatnot. But generally, I'd say we're in a very lucky space, and especially as engineer-based founders, I think the opportunity cost ends up being pretty low. So if you have an idea, you have conviction behind, in my mind, it's a pretty easy decision to make.
The last question on this, Jerry, back to you though. What's your take on that? What are some defining characteristics of good engineers that make founders?
To be thoughtful about this, I think one, you have to love the problem space. Startups aren't easy, right? And most don't work out, but when they do, there can be great adventures and company building. So you have to love the problem space. And I think with Rob and Martin, they love what they were building, right? They had a point of view on the world. And I think the great technical founders love the problem space. They have a point of view about how the world should work, like how they can fix this problem, right? And when you hear Rob and Martin talk to customers, they're not selling customers, they're trying to help the customer, right? They really are, we can help your company save money versus, Datadog or Prometheus or Wavefront, whatever, or Splunk. We can help you save money. We can make your company better. And so one, they have a point of view on the world and why they're right and how the world should work. They have a technical, they have an insight or advantage versus the market, right? Code is code, but they have insight on advantages they have that should be an unfair advantage in the world. And I think most importantly, they're going to be very good learners, right? Because it's one thing to build a product, Matt. It's another thing to hire a sales team, marketing team, HR to communicate to your team and be a good executive. And so, Rob and Martin were technical leaders at Uber 4 years ago, and now they're, have a few hundred employees running a multi-million-dollar business. And so I think what's exceptional about, Martin and Rob in particular is they're just great learners, right? They have the self-confidence to say, hey, I believe myself to start this company and leave Uber. They have the self-confidence to know what they built is pretty amazing, but they have the learning capability, as my partner Reid Hoffman calls it, to learn all the time what they don't know. And so it's amazing to watch what these guys have learned about company building. And I like I said, I'm lucky to be part of it. And I'm excited about what they're going to do for, we're excited what they did the last 4 years. I'm super excited about what the next 4 years or more will bring for these guys.
Yeah. So Martin, that brings us to right now. And you guys still talk to customers, I'm assuming, as the CEO, right?
That's most of my day spent engaging with customers. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me, what is your sales pitch? What's the main thing you want to get across to customers?
Yeah, it's a pitch that we talked about earlier. So, as companies are moving to cloud native, generally what ends up happening is your existing APM tooling is not as effective anymore. And on top of that, it's costing you so much more because this new environment, this new architecture produces so much more data. So our pitch is pretty simple. You want a more effective tool. I would say that effective tool allows you to catch and detect issues before your customers notice, which is critical in the modern world. And B, you probably want to do that at a better cost efficiency than you do today, right? And that cost efficiency both comes in how much you spend for the tool, but it also comes in other ways as well. Like for one company we worked with last year, we saved them 14,000 developer hours because the tool was just a lot more effective. They had to spend less time debugging. In a world right now where when I'm talking to most companies out there, they're trying to do more with less. Saving 14,000 developer hours comes in pretty handy. So, both on the cost efficiency side for a company overall, plus an effectiveness of the tool front, that is generally a pretty good a combination, and that's what we can do for a lot of companies out there. It's not a new problem. Observability has been around for a very long time, so every company has an existing solution. And Jerry mentioned some of the vendors we displace all the time, or perhaps you build your own. So it's often one of these things where if you're not happy with your existing tooling, if you're not happy with how much you're paying for it and the value you get out of it, that might be a time to give us a call or pop by our website and have a chat with us.
I like that phrase. You displace all the time. You displace these competitors all the time. So you win over them, right? What do people like about Chronosphere more than like Datadog?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think on the pricing side, of course, everybody loves a lower pricing, but more than the lower pricing, it's more about them feeling like they have control. Like they know how much they're paying for particular things, why they're paying for, and they understand the value of the data. Like that concept alone is much more valuable than a cheaper price point. If I can show you how valuable subsets of your data are and allow you to make a decision, because it's not as easy as reduce my bill. It's more, okay, here's a set of data that has some value, but how much value do you place on it? Do you place $100,000 a year worth of value or $10,000 a year? And sort of that ability to gain that information and make those decisions, I think, is super valuable. On top of that, I would say a lot of the existing tools out there, and Datadog included, there hasn't been a lot of innovation on how these tools work for the end developers. Everybody has a bunch of dashboards that have a bunch of alerts. The solution hasn't really changed for a very long time. And I'll say for end developers, we really think about it in a slightly different way. We think, okay, if you're trying to debug a microservice amongst hundreds of microservices, a list of dashboards and alerts, it's not enough. So like, what do you need there? What information do you need? And we're really trying to bring a different user experience and user interface to the problem as well. So again, a more effective tool, more cost efficiency is still the two core tenets for us here.
From my perspective, it seems like the tech stack is producing more and more data, exponentially more every year. Every year something gets added onto it. How are you scaling the company to keep up with that?
Yeah, I would say to what Jerry alluded to earlier, I think, we are trying to expand the platform to take care of more of these use cases on one hand. But very early on, this is the pattern that we saw, which was, the explosion of data growth is outpacing the growth of a business. And that's just a bad pattern to be in. And this is where we realized just better unit economics, just making it cheaper doesn't work. We need a different paradigm there. And I think that's where this concept of assigning value to the data and really allowing our customers to make some decisions there. And I would say it's not just a technique for observability data. I'm sure a lot of companies have huge data lakes, similar type of problem. Do you need all of that data in that data lake? Is it all equally as valuable to you in that raw format? Probably not, right? You can probably have, and it's more of an approach. And of course, we provide the tooling for that approach, more of an approach for better visibility, better understanding of that, and being able to make choices for how valuable a set of data is to the business versus how much they're willing to pay for it. But that's really ultimately the only solution I see to this exponentially growing data problem, because we're not going to be able to stop the data growth. So how do you deal with that problem? Yeah.
Is there a solution here that involves large language models or generative AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's a angle for that on the cost side. However, I think with large language models, what's interesting is it definitely has an interesting play for the interface to the data, right? There was a quote I heard recently that English is the hottest new programming language, right? And I think there's some truth to that. And if you look at observability, historically, it's had its own set of query languages that are very technical, right? Like SQL-like based query languages, where it's sort of the barrier to adopting that tool for most developers is there. It's not frictionless, right? And I would say what's interesting with things like large language models is that perhaps there could be an iteration of that interface where it's more, human nature conversational. So, I think there's a lot of potential innovation and iteration there. That's where we're looking at it. That's where a lot of folks in the observability space is looking at it. So I do think there's some innovation there. However, when you really think ultimately what AI could do, I don't know if it's quite there yet. I don't know if you can have a system come in and say, this is exactly what's wrong, and here's the fix. And part of that problem is because these models are all learning from past behavior.
Right.
And what's happening is we're iterating the product so quickly now, multiple times a day. It's normally new problems you're introducing to the system that you've never seen before. And hence, if you look at how these AI systems work now, like maybe they can apply a little bit of logic and reasoning, but generally they're trying to train off of past behavior. So when you have those types of models, it's not as effective like solving new unknown problems that occur every day.
Now, do you still code for the company?
I do not. Luckily, my engineering team does not let me. They've revoked my GitHub access, and they do not let me write any code anymore, which is good.
Yeah,
good thing for the business.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I don't really know you, but I think that your efforts are probably spent better elsewhere, right?
Yes, I would say so. I was never the best programmer, and hence, my co-founder is the CTO and leads the charge on the technical side, and I do not. There is a reason for that, but yeah.
Well, that was my very lame segue into company culture. So I was hoping you could tell me about this award that you won yesterday.
Yeah, so yesterday we were awarded 4 awards from Comparably. It's a website where they do anonymous employee surveys for what they think about the culture, the leadership team, myself, for example, and it's compiled of internal reviews, much like Glassdoor is. So, we generally like those types of awards because it's really reflective of what employees here think of, as opposed to, a independent judge, like a panel of judges or anything like that that's external to the company. So I always value these a little bit when there are awards around the culture, because it's reflective and it's feedback from our current employee base. In particular, I think we won awards this time for best leadership team, best company for career growth. And I think that just sort of shows the types of, the type of environment and the culture that we've created here, which, I would say wasn't easy to do during pandemic. We were born in 2019, so we're almost a pandemic company, if that's a thing. Like there are pandemic babies. It's a pandemic company. So and we, we've never had an option to really be in office. Like pretty early on, we had to go distributed and fully remote. So it's just part of the culture now. And I would say that has forced us to create a culture where we have to make remote work. And I'm not saying that remote is definitely better than in-person or vice versa, but I think when you're forced into one of those, you optimize the culture that way. And for us, we've optimized the culture for remote first, and clearly it's working out okay for us right now.
Clearly. And I do want to hear more from you, but I want to hear from Jerry too. Jerry, tell me about Martin's leadership style.
It's awkward on the webinar. No,
it's all good, Jerry. I'll cover my ears.
I love asking this question.
Like I said, I think Martin goes to the learner aspect, right? It's he's had to learn to be a founder, or learn to be CEO than learn to be a CEO during COVID, right? And in remote work, and a CEO during COVID was everything from how to communicate and lead remotely over Zoom, how to hire over Zoom, how to fire over Zoom. I think the early days of COVID, there was a situation where everyone was getting burnt out. Remember, Matt, like people were just coding all the time, working all the time. And so I think, Martin and his team saw that, and they do mandatory pencils down, right? It's like, the people had to take a forced day off, and, they would do virtual company meetings. One of these days we'll all be on Vision Pros or whatever Apple conjures up, but one of these days, they have virtual presence. So I think one, like I said, the good founders learn the aspects that they have not done before, and they seek mentorship from folks around them. Like, Martin has sought out other founders and other executives and advisors. Like Parm's a good advisor. He sought out for go-to-market help, right? And people around culture. So he's done that well. So I would say that's the most impressive aspects, that empathy he has, but yet, empathy is not, being nice or whatever. And he drives his team for excellence, right? I mean, the company succeeded beyond, I think, his plans, or, he's done very, very well because, him and his team, they have a high bar. So one, they have the respect of the team, but the bar for hiring, the bar for performance, the bar for shipping product, the bar for delighting customers is incredibly high, right? And, they keep a true, a true target of what the true north is, and that is to be an amazing company. So I think it's that combination, Matt. You have to have some empathy and understanding to your employees, but yet hold the bar high. From the first engineer to the last sales rep, like everyone knows what their job is. They know what the goal of the company is. They know what they have to execute, and especially in this day and age, right? Performance matters, and we want to deliver value for our customers. So the company and the board holds everyone to a high standard.
And I mean, Martin, you didn't build the company alone, so I was hoping you could talk about your co-founder there for a bit too, Ben, right? And what did he bring to the table that you didn't offer?
Yeah, and 100%. So my co-founder is Rob.
Rob, that's right.
Luckily, no, it's all good. So we, co-led the team together at Uber. I managed, and he was the technical lead. So we had a good working relationship there. We're both actually Australian. We've known each other for more than a decade. He officiated my wedding, actually. So, it's somebody that I've known and trusted for a very long time. I'd say for Rob, he's, as I mentioned earlier, he was always the better engineer than I was. He was always much stronger on the technical side. So, when we decided to pick roles, when we started the company, I think it was obvious who should stay on the technical track and who should attempt their best at everything else in the business. So, I would say these days, both they don't let me code, and also I would say the technical direction of the company does not come from me, really comes from a co-founder, and he's a lot closer to the product and the technical and architectural decisions. And I think, for a technology company, you need both there. So.
Yeah. Now, when you guys were building the company and hiring, firing, scaling everything, what advisors did you look for?
Yeah, anybody we could talk to, honestly, and a lot of these introductions came from Jerry. I think for me in particular, especially in my role, like marketing was new to me, sales was new to me, HR was new to me. So I probably had even more advisors and people that I was relying on than my co-founder. And generally it would be folks that were either one stage ahead of us because they had most recently dealt with these types of problems, or perhaps were many stages ahead of us, however, had seen a similar type of problem, a similar type of growth path, or like a similar type of challenge, or perhaps a same type of go-to-market motion, right? We're looking for people who've experienced the exact problems we've had to deal with, and not looking at them for necessarily the exact answer, but like, what did they learn from it? What's their perspective on it? And if we can crowdsource enough of those, we can at least come with some, more conviction on our decisions. There is the way that we've been looking at it.
I love that answer. I really appreciate that, because it takes a community, and you have to be able to ask for help.
And I would say one of the interesting things that I've become since I've become a founder is that founder community is very open to helping other founders, because I think it's you recognize how tough it is and how lonely it is. So I'm often surprised by like executives at public companies saying, yes, I can spare you half an hour to chat to you about this. And I'm like, wow, you must have a really busy schedule. But it's almost like it's a nice community in that way, and it really wants to make like me pay it forward for the future generation of founders as well, right? Always trying to make time for the new founders as well in a similar fashion. But
yeah. So I mean, we're about ready to wrap up here, and we're 6 months through the year, 6 months since your last fundraise. I'm curious when you're raising again.
That's a good question. And Jerry's on the call here. So I would say, I don't know if we have immediate plans to raise. You know, we raised, to your point, 2 pretty large rounds in the last year and a half. We're pretty well capitalized at this point. We're sort of heads down, and fundraising is one of these things. You have to do it, but ideally you do it and don't distract yourselves too much from building the product and building the company. So we're in a lucky position that, you know, we're well capitalized, and we're probably not looking to fundraise anytime soon. And you know, we're really heads down trying to really navigate the current economy that we're in, which is, again, another thing we're having to deal with 4 years into building a company. Like, you know, if I compare this to like starting a company in 2019 versus 2012, it may have been easier to do it in 2012 and have like a 9-year bull run. But yeah.
Absolutely. And Jerry, I always end on fundraising questions, so I'm hoping you can give us some advice on what founders should be doing that are fundraising right now.
Well, I think it's the storytelling, that's this narrative of what's the problem you're solving, and it's this tension, Matt, of creating this vision for a big problem, but marrying that with a narrow wedge that you can land and, you know, win consistently. And so, you know, founders typically don't fail because they think too small. They're always thinking very big, right? We're going to change the world with AI or with infrastructure, cloud, or mobile. But you have to marry that vision, what they have, with like, but, you know, the wedge we're going to land with, the product, the value, the competitive moat we're building is X, Y, Z. And so I think the ability to tell that story of why they have a differentiated advantage in that wedge in a market that's great, and like I said, you have the right side of history behind you, that's a great story. And you know, if you're going to create value for customers with that wedge in a very good market, you'll raise money in good markets or bad markets, right? I mean, Greylock is an early stage investors. We do mostly seed, Series A. Like, we're lucky enough to be the first VC in Chronosphere, and we love to talk to founders that have both a great ambitious vision and also have, you know, a point of view in the world and how they're going to change it.
You answered all of my questions. I was going to ask about what a good founder fit is for you guys, and you just answered that. So I really appreciate it. Jerry, you're very good at this.
It's too bad it's the last TechCrunch Live, Matt. You know, it took us so many TechCrunch lives just to get to the right answer.
That's right. Absolutely. Martin, thanks for joining us today. And Jerry, this has been great. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for all the listeners over the last couple of years doing this. TechCrunch Live has been great, but as everyone knows, everyone's getting kind of webinar out. So we're ending it before our welcome is no longer welcome. So Jerry, Martin, thank you so much for joining us today. And I guess we'll see you guys around.
Thank you for having us, Matt.
Thank you.